Welcome everyone. My name is Sarah. I am part of the Youth and Children's team for the Diocese of London, and you're so welcome on this really wet Tuesday evening for our workshop this evening. And our topic is all about how we can engage with year sixes as they move on to secondary school. And I'm sure you're here because maybe it's something that you have been thinking about or want to know more about. So it's really great that you have joined us. We have two amazing speakers this evening, and I'm going to introduce the first one to you now. And his name is Charles Merritt from Youthscape. And yeah, we'll just get Charles up, and then I've got some icebreaker questions for you, Charles, just to get you started. So hello, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Just to go with the flow, my first question is if you could be any animal, which would you be and why?
I think I'm probably a meerkat, if I was honest. Only because I really love Timon from The Lion King, and I think that's probably like my spirit animal, if I was to have a spirit animal.
I love that. That's really cool. Amazing. And my second question is basically, what makes you laugh? Like, what's the one thing that would make you laugh? Or who or what makes you laugh?
Yeah, great question. I love comedy, so I love watching comedy, and I love The US Office. I know that was just talked about a little bit earlier. I actually watched Steve Martin in The Jerk for the first time on Friday, which I really loved. That was very funny. Really recommend it if anyone's not watched it. It's a great film.
Amazing, great. Well, that's good. Just to get the flow going. So tell me about your background, your current role. Like, why are you here? That kind of thing. Yeah, tell me what's brought you to us this evening.
So I currently work for and plan to continue to work for. It's hard to know, I guess. Youthscape, which is a charity, youth work charity based in Luton, and we do lots of different things. And my role as part of Youthscape is creative content developer, particularly for Launchpad, which is our training course for vicars to help vicars create youth work in churches that there are currently no youth work groups or spaces happening in. And then I also work for Youthscape Essentials, which is our sort of volunteer leader training sessions. And I create the written materials and the videos and the digital activities, and basically whatever creatively needs to be done, I get handed it and do my best. And before that, though, before I was working for Youthscape, I was a children's worker at a church in Reigate for 5 years. So that's hence why it's a big topic for me. I love children's work, and I currently still do children's work at my church that I go to now in Luton, but also I run the children's work at Satellites Festival in the summer as well.
Amazing. Well, we're so excited to have you here this evening, so thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to hand over to you now because I believe you have some amazing things to show us to do with the topic. So thank you so much. I'll hand it over to you, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to start with the first question is this: what is the biggest change you faced recently? What is the biggest change you faced recently? And it might be that you have moved house, or it might be that you've got a new job, or it might be that you've got an addition to the family. And as you think about that question, what emotions does the thought of change bring up within you? As you hold on to that, let's focus in then. For many, the move between year 6 and year 7 will be the biggest change a child will have faced in their life so far. And it's easy to forget that as an adult, right? Because we've faced plenty more changes since then. But for these year 6s, this will be a monstrous change unlike anything they've ever faced before. And the majority of children haven't lived long enough to have faced many challenges or changes growing up. So even if you've moved around primary schools, moving to secondary school is a very different beast. And of course, there are life situations that happen for some children, but actually for the majority, this will be it. This will be the biggest change they'll have faced. So take yourself back to year 6. For some of us, that will be quite recent. For others, that might be quite a long time ago. But take yourself back to year 6. How did you feel about the prospect of leaving primary school How did you feel about getting older? How did you feel about going to secondary school? Whatever your experience was of that transition, it'd be unfair to assume that the challenges or prospects that we faced at that age is the same going through it now. So let's focus on this current cohort of year sixes. This is a group of children who have faced a worldwide pandemic. And that creates a significant and understandable wildcard about how children will react to moving to a new school today. Year sixes were only year 2 when lockdown began. They only had 2 years of experiencing school fully before having to do online lessons and adapt to the pandemic's restrictions. This means they've effectively only had 2 years to adapt again to normal school life before being thrust into a new school life in the form of secondary school. Half of their school life so far has been disrupted. So although there is an argument that they may be more resilient to change, there's another which suggests that more change could bring back up the anxiety of previous experience of change, especially changes that came about so quickly with little preparation. And they were facing a change too that their adults hadn't had to cope with before either, which means that their own support systems were feeling anxious and uncertain. So let's add to the pandemic the physical changes that children are making at the time of year 6. Not all children will be starting their journey of puberty, but there will be at least some who have already started. And it's true that children are more aware of these changes due to sex education being introduced earlier in primary school. But learning about these changes and actually experiencing them are 2 different things. So let's add to that the amount of children who have seen online pornography. And think about the complexity that brings. A Children's Commissioner report found that the average age at which children first see pornography is 13. By age 9, 10% had seen pornography. 27% had seen it by age 11, and half of the children who had seen pornography had seen it by age 13. So nearly a third of year 6s will have seen pornography before they've even left primary school, before they've maybe even had their first relationship or first sort of inkling of any sort of sexuality. That's going to be a huge factor in terms of how they're going to grow up and how they're going to view relationships and all the rest of it. And then finally, let's consider technology. Technology is playing a bigger part in the lives of year 6s than 10 years ago. This is a generation that have never known a world without the internet. And perhaps more scarily, they are younger than iPhones by 5 years. They're at least 6 years older than YouTube, and TikTok is very much in the playground. Despite restrictions on all of these apps and accounts, they're still on it. They're still taking part in this. So that's us understanding our current year 6s. This is who they are. This is what they've experienced. This is the world that they're growing up in. But what are the changes that these children face in the jump between primary and secondary? And one year 6 that I spoke to helpfully summarized this section for me when talking about what they were worried about in the move to secondary school. They simply said, different building, different everything. So let's break that down. Firstly, it's more than likely that their new school will be physically much bigger than their primary school. One of the most common worries among year 6s before they move to secondary school is navigating their way between lessons. Will I get lost? What happens if I do get lost? How will I know where I'm going? Being in an unfamiliar place is daunting at the best of times, but knowing that there are punishments in the form of detentions or warnings or whatever behavior strategies are in place, these added consequences, if you can't find your way around the school and are late to lessons, add to the already existing anxiety. Secondly, with a bigger building comes a bigger cohort. Secondary schools tend to be substantially larger amounts of pupils than primary schools. The national statistics from 2022 and 2023 show that the average size of primary school in England accommodates 276 pupils. Compare that then to the average of a secondary school in England, which accommodates 1,054 pupils. That's nearly 4 times as big, and we're talking averages here. So there will be cases where a child might go from a tiny village primary school in which there are mixed year groups to a massive comprehensive school where they're surrounded by lots of different people, all from all walks of life. Either way, there's a lot more people to interact with, be influenced by, be intimidated by, and potentially be bullied by. The increase in pupil size won't be the only increase either. Year sixes will be used to having a singular teacher for their class, one teacher who teaches all of the subjects, and they will journey with them through that year. In year 7, however, they'll be introduced to 7 different teachers teaching different subjects that they might not have been taught before, in many different teaching styles, in different classrooms. That's a lot of change too. And who's in your class may vary depending on lessons too. So even if you have pre-existing friendships in one class, you may end up not knowing anyone in the next lesson. The loss and changes in friendships is also highly significant. For those moving to a different secondary school from their friends, that brings a whole load of mental health struggles. But even if you are moving school with your friends, who's to say that those friendships will survive that transition? What if your new friends find new friends and leave you behind? In 2019, there was a study into the effects of the school transition on friendships. The results found that there was a substantial instability in children's friendships as they moved from primary to secondary school, with 73% reporting a different best friend 1 year later. And although it's great to know that children find new friends at their new school, put yourself in the position of, what if you were the old best friend? What if you are the one who's been abandoned? So that's the context for school children. But what does this mean for us as youth and children's workers in the church? At the end of 2023, the Youthscape Centre of Research released phase 1 of their research, Translating God. And in the first phase of their research, the team tracked down the trends that have been taking place for young people between 2010 and 2021. What the data shows about the attendance of young people, won't surprise you, at youth groups, is that there is a decline between the ages of 10 and 11 and 12, the same point in which young people are moving between primary school and secondary school. And I'm sure we're all aware of this. I'm imagining that's why you're here attending this evening. We've noticed a dip between our children's ministry and our youth ministry. So why is there this dip? Well, let's consider all that we've talked about so far and put it into 3 reasons. I think there's 3 main reasons as to why we see a dip. The first being this: there's a change in independence, or independence, as I put there. There's a change in independence. When moving to secondary school, many young people find they are now responsible for themselves getting to and from school. This might mean that the journey no longer takes them neatly past the church hall after school for youth group. It may also mean that they forget. They're so focused on getting themselves home that they forget where they're meant to be, with no adult around to remind them or drop them off. And their newfound independence may extend into their church habits too. They may put their foot down and say, you know what, I don't want to go to church today. And their adults might say, okay, you're old enough to decide for yourself, stay at home. The second point is change in relationships. Some young people might feel awkward at the prospect of seeing old school friends who have moved on and created new friendships without them. Some may have new friends themselves who are providing a new influence on them, and as a result may no longer feel comfortable attending church for fear of rejection from the new friendship group that they found themselves in. And then finally, there's a change in capacity. Increased workload may mean that young people stop prioritizing church life in order to do their homework or study for exams. And these exams may not seem like a huge deal to us, but they may feel like a huge deal to a year 7 who's never faced this pressure before. There's also competition. Most schools have a vast array of extracurricular activities for young people to take part in. As a result, young people's lives may become so busy, and church may be the one thing they feel they can sacrifice in order to create space. So those are the three things that I think are the challenges. I think these are the main reasons that we see a dip in children's work and youth work. I'm going to hand back over to Sarah, who's going to interview Chris, I believe.
Thank you so much, Charles, for your first bit. We'll have you come back on again soon. So obviously that's a lot of theory that we've been thinking about with this age group. And I now have a local youth worker from the Diocese of London called Chris Kettle. Hello, Chris. Thank you so much for joining. Hello. Just before we get started, I'm going to ask you some icebreaker questions just to set the tone. So my first question is, would you rather be always hot or always cold?
Always cold. Definitely, I'd rather be always cold.
I can imagine those hot days again. Oh, that's
I like the views of the summer, but not the it feels.
I know that was very random. And the second question is, if you could have any superpower, then what would that be, and why? I guess, and what would you do with it?
I'm quite impatient in traffic, so I would definitely like to be able to, I guess, either fly or just be able to get myself somewhere A to B. At the moment today, I got quite impatient. So that would be my superpower, I think.
Amazing. That's it. Thank you. Yeah, it was just to break the ice, literally. We all have a good little icebreaker question. So just tell us who you are, what your background is, and then we're going to do some questions. Just do we'll just have like a little chat as if we're having a little cup of tea together. So tell us about who you are. Great.
No, thanks, Sarah. That sounds good. Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris. So I'm a youth worker at Hope Church in Hounslow. So I've been youth lead here since 2015. I have to do the maths. So I've been here since 2015, and within my role, I oversee our youth work. So our weekly youth drop-ins, we have 2 of those throughout the week. Our kick football academy, our youth chat sessions on a Sunday, and then our schools work. So they're the 3 areas that I oversee in my role here. And I'm Hounslow born and bred as well. So
amazing.
Home to me.
That's great. So obviously the theme is about year sixes and how you engage with them. So actually that is the first question. Share what you're doing. Like, how do you engage schools and young people? Just tell us what you do.
I think the first really important thing to add is we're a sort of a 2-church parish, and less than half a mile away from both our 2 sites, we have a primary school. And I think that really kind of sets the context as to why we're engaging these primary schools and how we're doing it, as they're the only 2 schools in our parish. So there are 3 primary ways that I'm supporting them, and we're kind of engaging with them, and that's through sport. That's through one-to-one mentoring. We have a small team of one-to-one mentors who go in, and it's through small groups, which are typically year on year. They're year 6 groups who we support as they transition to secondary school. And so we're doing that at 2 different schools, 2 different days during the week. So they're the primary ways that we're engaging with them.
Amazing. So what have you found works so far in terms of having a real impact on these young people and kids? Like, obviously it's amazing that you're going into these 2 schools. Some people find it really hard to even get into school. So what do you find that that's worked for you while you're doing this?
Yeah, generally in our youth ministry, we always prioritize longevity, but that always looks like a number of years. You're talking 5, 6, 7 years, but you don't get that opportunity really when you're just working with year 6 students. You have them at most for a year, but we started off really just seeing them for about 6 weeks. And we didn't really have time where we could form relationships with them. Not that were meaningful and that would last. We couldn't really break the ice. We didn't really have an opportunity to invite them to church if that's something they were interested in. And so this really impacted our numbers. And really the moment that we had a bit of a breakthrough and we began to see longevity working was after about 2 years of us just going into the school and running these sessions for 6 weeks, just one hour a week. was after a couple of years of doing that, we just had a feedback meeting with the head of year 6, and her feedback was that they would love it if we could come in throughout the whole year, really not for their benefit or for our benefit, but for the students' benefit, because that was really where they were looking to form lasting relationships. For us, that was a really easy win. It just meant that we could go in. We weren't necessarily planning sessions. It was just about being there and joining with what they were doing. And so when we began to run our after school sessions where we'd invite them to come to church, that was really where we saw a difference, because we were there for that last hour of the school day, and then they would want to come with us and kind of come and join what we were doing at our after school club, which was where we could look at transitioning to secondary school in a bit more relational way. And the first year we did that, we saw over 50% of the year group in one of those schools come to the after school session, which worked out at about 65 young people. So the first thing I would say from our experience that works is longevity. And the second thing is partnerships. And I guess I'm thinking the other side of the summer holidays, you know, when they're going to secondary school, they all of a sudden they're not in one school. As we know, they could be split across 1, 5, 10, 20 potentially different secondary schools. And so then it's hard to manage that on your own, to keep those relationships going when they're so scattered. And so our strategy has been to form some partnerships so that we can either directly or indirectly support these young people that we're getting to know. So I've just got like a couple of quick examples. In one secondary school that we're now working in, we're partnering with KIC GB, who are already there. We're just going and joining what they're doing, and we're seeing some kind of continuation of relationships with year 6 students we already know. Getting to know some of the school safeguarding teams has worked, just where we can quickly send them an email or give them a call if there's someone we're concerned about. And also some local churches who we've been able to form a bit of partnership with. So yeah, that's been kind of the 2 areas where we've seen it's worked so far, and we've seen some fruit from that.
Amazing. So how do you approach it as a Christian youth worker?
I love this question, because when you asked it to me, I was thinking about, well, how do I actually physically approach the school when I'm on my way there? How am I approaching it? And what am I reflecting through what I've communicated so far, my presence when I'm there, and through what we can offer? I like to be prepared. So I always go in and I've got my session plan, whether that's in my head or physically in my hand. But as I do this and I approach the school, I know that I'm not there for myself. We're there for those who we're going to go and support, whether that's the students or the staff. And we're there to bless them in whatever way we can. So I have my session plan, but I go in with an open mind, which can be quite hard to do for someone who likes to plan and to have things worked out. But from what I've seen as we've been journeying with these schools for the past 3 or 4 years, is that they're really unpredictable. So sometimes just your presence there as an extra pair of hands is gold to them. I think of this moment, which only happened probably about 3 or 4 months ago. I'd gone into the school to meet with one of the year 6 teachers, and we were just having this conversation in the corridor. And as we were standing there, this boy walked in between us in tears, and we kind of both clocked it, and we thought, no, it can't be who we thought it was. But it was a boy who had just been in year 6 the year before, and had just come back because he was just struggling with life at secondary school and just wanted somewhere safe to come. And so me being there meant that the teacher was able to go and support him, and I could carry on doing what she was doing and what she needed me to do. So sometimes just being there and being open to sometimes distraction is I think, of benefit to the school, but also where we can really be a blessing. And I was in a meeting with one of my colleagues the other week, and he shared this in our reflection. It was that 60% of Jesus' encounters with people were interruptions. And in the first three chapters of the book of Mark alone, we see that Jesus had more than 35 interruptions, and where he was in the boat trying to just get away and get some peace, or he was going up to a mountaintop to pray, but people would come and follow him. He worked with these distractions, and I think that's I think part of what we're called to do in schools is to sometimes just work with distraction and be
I love that. Yeah.
who we needed to be in that moment.
Yeah, there's definitely like a balance, isn't there, between being distinctively Christian and just being present and willing to help with the need in front of you. Like I love that. It's really perfect. So what principles have guided the work?
Yeah. This was quite I guess a hard question for me to answer, but also an easy one. Just next to me at my desk here, I've got 4 sheets which are principles that either I think I've learned or have challenged me over the last few years. Principles around leadership that just resonate with me, and so I was kind of looking to them for my reference for this. So in terms of our work with schools and with year sixes particularly, I think the first principle was about not being anxious around creating strategies. Strategy feels so important, and we need to know, why we're doing this, how we're going to do it, how we're going to make it work. But I think if you're able to be there for a year 6 student for a number of months, a year, maybe more than 1 year, if it's someone you know through your church or you're already in the school, I think being there for that period of time trumps strategy. So not being anxious about creating a strategy, but just being there is one of the principles that I think has really kind of helped us and really guided what we've done. Asking what you can do. Being honest, I've probably done this a little bit less recently because you get to know the school and the context. But in those early stages, just asking what you can do and what's helpful, and continuing to do that. I think that's a challenge for myself as well. But that principle of just constantly asking yourself, but also the school, what is it that's really helpful? And my final thing, I think, is really like celebrating the small things, because moving to secondary school is a really big deal. And I think if the focus is always on those big achievements, sometimes we can maybe miss or forget to celebrate with them and help them celebrate the small things that they're achieving, like in that process of transitioning to secondary school. So always celebrating those small things. The fact that they maybe will turn up to your session again, and maybe share a little bit more. I think it's celebrating some of those small things that, kind of guide what we do.
Amazing. I love you said earlier about having a plan but being totally open-minded for it to change. And that's a really great principle too. I think with this age group, you don't know what's going to happen, but we have to be open-minded, and I think that's really fantastic, like that you're doing this and putting this in place in your work. Obviously, for people, the last question would be, what tips do you have for anyone looking to start doing this? Obviously, you've been doing it for a while, so have you any tips? Like, what's your top tips for doing that?
Yeah, I definitely didn't ask enough questions. I think in the first kind of few months that I was present in the school, I definitely didn't ask enough questions. So I would say that learning about the environment you're in, even if you know the context, like of the area really well, the demographic of the school or the year group, I would still think, just encourage everyone just to learn about the environment, I think, of the school particularly. What I've seen is that every single year group is different. And so there is a sense in which we take from year to year group what we've learned, but I think you have to apply that in the environment of the actual year group in terms of the people that make it up. And it's applying that kind of in that context and knowing, who is it that makes up this group? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the particular needs? And I think that's why our sessions look different from year on year. Yeah, be there for the long haul as well. I think like for them, for the year 6 students themselves, I think that's really important. We had one year group in particular where we had the highest number of year 6 students who came from the school to the after school session. And we thought we'd found like the winning formula, like yes, this is working. And we previously trialed the year before about running another set of kind of 6 after school sessions in September for when they were going to secondary school. And we'd had some joy in that. But after the summer, where we'd had this highest number of young people come along, we were getting the word out. We like, see you in September. We're going to be back after school. Come and join us. And we virtually saw anyone turn up. And I think what we learned was that those 6 weeks of the summer are huge for young people, and the groups or the people or things that may influence them or worry them over these 6 weeks are really significant. And what I really kind of reflected on was how over the summer, I think we weren't there for them. The church was not present for them. And so in September, when the big day came and they were back to school and they were settling into life at secondary school, they didn't see the need to come to the church. And I think, that was our learning from that year particularly, but it was about being there for the long haul. And actually in that in-between time, when they're really getting ready for secondary school, how can we as the church just still be present for them when their primary school is finished and then they're not seeing you there? Where are they seeing their youth leaders, the church? I think that's something we've really kind of reflected on and shaped what we do as well.
Amazing. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing, Chris. Like, obviously you're doing an amazing work, like, and it's hard as well, but it's really exciting. And like you said, like it's going for the long haul, and just keeping these guys in shape and that sort of. It's really exciting, and thank you so much for sharing what you're doing. And we'll pray for you at the end. So don't worry, we'll get back to you. But thank you so much. I'm gonna.
Thank you, Sarah.
That's no problem. It's all right. So we're going to just hand back over to Charles again. He's going to just share some tips as well. So I'll hand over to Charles.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, as well. There's another overlap in what I'm going to say and what Chris has said as well, because of course there's going to be. So I kind of just came up with 3 implications for us. And similarly to what Chris was saying, like the first implication is to be intentional. So if we want children to keep coming to our youth groups, and if we want to see them grow into young people within our churches, then we need to be intentional about doing so. So like, how can you build this into the vision of your church? And I realize that for some of us, that's easier than others. For those of us who are youth and children's workers, this is something you can change and implement relatively easily and quickly. And then for others who see themselves exclusively as youth workers or children's workers, this is going to require teamwork. And we have to remember that children don't become young people overnight. The age brackets that we put on our ministries are there to help define areas of our work, but really we're working with the same people at different points of their lives. So what is your vision for the children in your church? Where do you want the children to be by the time they land in your youth groups? When I worked for a church, we gathered as a youth and children's team, and we decided upon 5 truths that we wanted every child and young person to know by the time they moved into adulthood. And that meant that we were all working together on achieving the same goals differently, but all working together to achieve the same goals. And I think as well, just being intentional about this might mean beginning youth work with young people much earlier than year 7 and perhaps even earlier than year 6. So have you considered doing a year 5 and 6 group? Or what about a year 6 and 7 group? The church I'm part of now, we're in the talks of adding a 3rd group on a Sunday that is for year 5s to year 8s, in order to attract those at the older end of junior church, but also to help those who have dropped off in that transition between children and youth because they find the youth group too advanced for them. They've got 17-year-olds spouting theology that they have no idea about. So yeah, and then at my old job, we had 3 of our youth groups take place on the same day, one after another. So we had our year 5 and 6 group, followed by our year 7 and 8 group, and then by our 9 to 13s group. And by taking place on the same night, it just meant that the young people had sort of unconsciously reserved that day for youth group, meaning that there was less risk of it being replaced by another group when they made the jump between secondary and between primary and secondary even. And actually, as a result of that, we managed to keep the majority of the group from year 6 to year 7 as a result of that planning. So that's like my first sort of tip for you. And then the second implication, again, as Chris was sharing, being relational. So when you're choosing your volunteers without burning them out, because doing 3 youth groups in the same evening is quite tiring, but when choosing your volunteers and without burning them out, are there opportunities for crossover between the age groups? Are there volunteers who'd be willing to work with the older year groups of your children's ministry and the bottom end of your youth work? And having those volunteers and leaders who journey with young people as they enter youth groups brings 2 things. It brings stability in a time of real change, in a time where relationships and friendships are thrown into turmoil. Having someone who knows you and you know cares about you is important. And they can provide an emotional support because they've already done the groundwork of building relationship with that young person. And if that groundwork has been successful, then they should be someone that the young person can trust enough to share how they're truly feeling. And if they don't, knowing that they could might be enough. And then the second part of the relation is that these volunteers can bring prior knowledge into the youth group. They'll know which kids are more vulnerable, volatile, or disruptive. They'll also know the potential that can be unlocked in those young people and the strategies that work best to include them and to empower them. So yeah, just really making sure that our spaces of youth and children's work are about creating a safe space of belonging. It's what sets us apart from any other group that a young person may attend. I was always surprised that we had so many kids come to our year 5 and 6 group. We had about 65 coming each week. And what I was doing was nothing particularly fancy or even very exciting. And it struck me one day because I was really puzzled about it, and I thought about it, and I suddenly realized that every other group or activity that those children attend expected something from them. There were badges to be earned or trophies to be won or a part in the play to be auditioned for. But our humble year 5 and 6 group, there was no pressure to perform. It was just a place to belong and just be. There was no expectations, no presumptions, no limitations. Just come as you are and be welcomed into this loving space. So my question is, are we creating these loving spaces that feel unique to a young person? Are we giving them space to grow and to explore and to have fun? Or are we providing another space in which they're expected to shut up and learn? What are we providing? What are those spaces? And how can we make those spaces more enticing and more important in their lives, that when they have the choices of where they're going to go, they're going to go, actually, no, I want to go to youth group because it's different from everything else that I go to. And then the third and final implication is to provide the groundwork to help ease this transition into the conversations and topics you cover in your ministry. So how can we prepare children for this jump to secondary school before they're even thinking about it? So as a volunteer in the youth group that I was part of, I noticed that the year 7 and 8 really struggled to do the small group discussions that were a crucial part of our youth ministry. And it struck me that that in our children's groups, a lot of the time they would be talked at rather than talked with. And then they got into the youth group, they were suddenly expected to share their thoughts on things they'd only half listened to as a kid. And as a result, I made the decision to have dedicated time in our Sunday morning kids groups for them to discuss the Bible story or topic we were talking about, just like they would do in the youth groups. And this helped them ease into the youth ministry better than before, as they were prepared as to what to expect. And as part of that year 5 and 6 group that I ran, we were able to explore topics in advances of the changes happening to them. So we put into place vital coping strategies. A couple of the topics, for example, we covered were friendships, especially navigating tough friendship situations, something that year 6s find particularly difficult as their friends begin thinking long-term about who they'll be hanging out with next year at their new school. We also tackled emotions using the ever useful Pixar film Inside Out as our basis. And with the sequel underway this year, tackled it. Think of all the content that could be mined, right?
Wow.
So, and this helped put into healthy mental well-being practices, as well as exploring how Jesus experienced emotions. And it was such a memorable and useful series to follow, and something that I'm praying has had an impact on the children I worked with now as they navigate their own teenage years. Another conscious decision I made was to get involved with the local schoolwork charity. So a bit like what Chris was saying with Kick, like going into both primary and secondary schools meant that I became a familiar face in the spaces outside of my role at church. And this allowed them to know that they had a friend to go to in school if they needed it. In fact, I used to do mentoring in secondary schools, and one of the young people from my church knew that I was there and would come in his break times, and we'd just play Uno. It wasn't one of my students that I was mentoring, but he knew that I was there, and he was going through a really rough time as well. And then, of course, as Chris was saying, like transition workshops, like how can we help them process the upcoming changes? So whether this is in school or perhaps your local school doesn't allow groups in to lead them, your church youth group could be the place to explore this with children. Or another fascinating sort of tidbit that I learned from somewhere, and I can't remember which church did this, but one church, there was a school where they wouldn't allow them to go into. And so every year they just gave them like strawberries and cream or something at the end of the school year, like the teachers, just as a way with little cards saying, hey, we're praying for you. And I started doing that to a school that didn't allow anyone in. And I did it for 2 years, and then COVID hit and it really ruined all my plans. And then I left the year after. So I never saw the fruits of it. But I do think it's a really good strategy just to bless those schools that might not want you in there, just so that they're familiar with your face and familiar with who you are, so that when you do approach for something like Chris was talking about, they might be a little bit more open to exploring it with you because you've built a relationship with them. But yeah, those are my 3 points. Sorry, that was very...
No, that's great. Thank you so much.
Right.
That's great. I think it shows how excited you are about this age group and the things we can do and what we can pray about and plan for the future. It's really, really exciting. So thank you so much, Charles, for coming today and sharing with us. Really, really appreciate it. Amazing. So just to we're gonna just what I want you to do, if you want to, is in the chat, sort of write like what stood out for you today, like what actions are you taking away from today as well. Just sort of think about that, and we'll see what people say, and we'll see what they say, and Charles and all will help me think they're talking about. I think. What stood out? I think I'm meant to ask Sam what stood out for him.
I was asked if I would share what I took from it, just to create some filling, frankly, while people write in the chat. I mean, it's difficult to get away from that sense of being there for the long haul, isn't it? I was really something Chris said that I'd never really thought of, is just this thing that we shut down all of our children's work in the holidays generally, that maybe not on Sundays, but a lot of youth groups and stuff shut for the school holidays, and we give our leaders a break, and that's often a good thing for the leaders. But that has never struck me before, that is a time, particularly for year 6s, where that's one of the most important times where you ought to be trying to support them. So that was really interesting. I also quite like that idea of having all the youth work in the same slot. I thought that was quite interesting, and that sense of just being able to say, look, on Tuesdays we go to church type thing. Sounds like a really good and practical plan, because I think sometimes we do, particularly in the lives of a lot of young people, the busyness is extraordinary, of the homework and the clubs and the after school and all that expectation. So I think that those were my things I wrote down. I thought that was really interesting. I'm always, whenever we talk about this sort of transition thing, I'm always struck by we are fighting against Like, you know what I mean? There's less scouts than cubs, and there's and there's less footballers who are playing over 11 than are playing under 11. That it is quite a normal thing for young people to get to sort of the start of secondary school and reinvent themselves a bit. It's like the opposite, isn't it? When young people go to university, there's an opportunity where they reinvent themselves to something they can be more open to faith. But suddenly there's a reinvention that happens at the start of secondary school, and it is challenging. So I think I've also heard that from you guys as well, which has been great, which is that this is difficult and it's something we're all working on. And there isn't a, guys, why haven't you done this? But there's some stuff we've got that can help. And I appreciate that about the way you've presented as well.
Amazing. That's great. Yeah, I think we have a question. We've got a question, so I'm going to read out. When it comes to content for Sunday morning youth, and what do you find are the most helpful in theming sessions? Is a question that's been asked. I'm trying to.
I would say you've also put junior church is often story driven, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think stories are really important, and Jesus taught us stories, so I'm a big believer of stories being really important. I think I would always approach it with what is relevant to the young people, rather than going, oh, we're going to teach this story today. Like, why are you teaching that story? What is it for the young people that is actually relevant to them? What is it about that story that will actually speak to their life? So as I was saying about about friendships, like that, finding a story in the Bible about friendships or good relationships, and then applying that to them is really useful, because they'll understand that. Or we did a series on Samson once and kind of looked at anger, and that when you're angry and you make decisions and bad decisions, like how does that affect? And that was really relevant to the young people that I know. So, and I think also you probably know your young people better than I will, because I don't know them at all. But you will know them better. So what is it for them that that they struggle with, or that they have questions about, and going from there and using that as your basis, I think would be my advice.
Oh, trying to say, I think someone has mentioned that they want to continue with summer group meets. I actually did holiday clubs for that age group, sort of in between that time. So you sort of kept that consistency going. But then they didn't speak to me once I got into secondary school. But I tried. So it's one of those things. I think. I mean, Chris was saying, like, you just have to keep going, and you're with them for a season. So, but I still went crazy with my holiday clubs when I got to do it. Let's see what else. Somebody loves Sam Yoda. That's very exciting. I think the group for early running year 5 to year 8's been interesting for people as well. Quite a vast age group, but actually it's sort of a good one. Let's see. Oh, someone. I'm anxious about the transitions too. Oh, have you done anything to engage with support parents at this time as well? Actually, someone's just asked that, like supporting parents with the transition.
That's a magnificent question.
That is a fantastic question.
That is the most terrifying time of your entire parenting life, is the build up to secondary school, because you're pretty sure that all those things that only really happened on Grange Hill are going to happen to your kid. Sorry, I'm just endorsing the question. Got too excited.
No, it's fine. Like, I'm not. Yeah, like.
What are your thoughts, gentlemen? What would you do?
Have you done anything to engage and support parents at this time?
I wouldn't say we've done anything, I guess, to the same extent as intentionally. I mean, we know when there are kids within our church who are in year 6, and I think the thing we are intentional about is just talking with the parent. And I guess the questions are more around what do they think their child needs, what would be helpful. But yeah, I think that's a really good question. Yeah, it's the other side of the coin. It's the parents, and yeah, how they're feeling about it. Their anxieties, their worries, kind of where's their platform.
And I think there's a sense of helping parents to see that this is like a normal thing, that this is how you feel. Like, I think sometimes we don't say that enough, that being really worried about your kids is just part of being a parent. And there's no doubt that secondary school with a child feels a bit like, sometimes it feels like walking on a frozen lake, that even when you think it's going well, and you feel like, they're having a really good time and results are good or whatever, you still feel like any moment you may discover a crack. And you suddenly realise that this lovely walk over a frozen lake is about to become an awful swim. So part of that is helping parents to have a space to be able to say that, I think, and just being able to affirm that and say it is okay to feel like that, that anxiety that we felt when we were 11 suddenly seems to come back. Absolutely worth saying that it's normal. And also sometimes just having an older parent to say, yep, we survived that, but it did feel like that, is sometimes important as well.
I wonder whether as well parents probably weirdly have more support. I imagine would have more support in terms of whether you have life groups or whether you've got even in the peer age group of school friends, there might be one parent who's already had a child go through that transition and so can give advice to parents. Whereas with the year sixes, they only know one another. They've never been through that sort of change, and so I wonder whether, like, my experience with year six transition, actually, the person who pointed me towards it was a parent who said, "My son's feeling really anxious. He won't talk to me about it. Could you do something in the church?" And I said yes, and that's what kind of started me on this sort of journey of particularly focusing on this sort of secondary primary transition period. But yes, I echo everything as well, that actually, we probably should involve parents in these conversations too, and that they're facing different things and different feelings.
Right. There's a question that is of a different tack that Levi has just pointed out to me about the way we operate in that space between children's work and youth work. It's interesting. I do a year 5 and 6 group as well, and we're doing a similar thing. I call it silly youth work, where we're sort of trying to operate as a youth group but mess about a bit more. But definitely there's something, isn't there, about junior church is often story driven and youth group is often issue driven. Is there anything sort of resource wise you guys can think of that would help to bridge that gap, help you go from those two very clear ways of operating?
There's not a kind of a resource or anything that comes to mind, certainly that we use, but I think we had a period of time where I think our youth group sessions were, I think you summarised it quite well, kind of issue driven. But I think some feedback we had, particularly from some of the year 6 kids who came up to the youth group, was that they loved what happened in their kids group, but it felt a little bit disconnected from church in that they weren't doing exactly the same thing that the main church were doing. So they asked us what was the youth group like, and it made me realise that, well, maybe we're the same in that it feels maybe slightly disconnected from the wider church. And so we really have periods of times where we follow what we're doing in church. And so it's not really like a resource as such, but it just creates a bit of a sense of we're all looking at the same stories, the same areas, but we're doing it as a church and not just kind of in isolation to each other. I just wonder if there's something there around kind of talking to the kind of maybe the church leadership or the wider team around kind of that dynamic.
Thank you. Any thoughts, Charles?
Yeah, I think I talked about this, but to kind of build on what Chris was saying, I think we struggle to do that. Sometimes, I don't know, sometimes the church leadership might not necessarily want to do what the kids want to do. And so the adults do what the adults do. But we actually, as I said, like as a youth and children's team, we came up with the 5 points that we wanted young people and children to come away with by the time they moved into adulthood. And so we actually did the same things as a unit. We weren't doing the same things as the adults. We were doing stuff as youth and children's that were the same. And I think that's what we could control. We couldn't really control beyond that, despite protests. But that's what we did. And actually, we kind of we also started to experiment towards my time before I left. I started doing a sort of handbook, like a parent's book for the parents of the term and what we were covering, so that they could discuss it at home. And it had QR codes to worship, songs to play at night, videos of the Bible story that we were looking at, questions to be asking during the week and stuff, just to help that sort of adult and children sort of relationship, that even if the adults weren't doing the same thing on church, they know what the kids were doing on the Sunday and could help build that into their sort of family rhythms if they wanted to. I've seen the question, which is, what are the 5 points?
Yes, I don't know if Sally's asking that because she's interested or because it's just, it's a test.
I think it was, God loves you. God created you and God knows you. Maybe that was the same one. God knows you. God loves you. Jesus died for you. We are part of a church, and we are called to follow him. We are called to make a difference in the world, or something like that. I think those were the 5 points. I might have made them up.
Sounded loosely Bible-based.
Very rusty.
I believe
there's a whole theme of holiday club now for you to do with them in the summer. So.
Great. We're just about out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, so we'll just like, what can we pray for you guys about? Like, what just to finish, really, like what can we pray for you at the moment in your work and what you're doing with these wonderful year sixes and all that.
I would love prayer for. So as I said, Youthscape runs Satellites Festival in the summer, and I do the kids work there. And what I love about the kids work is it's kind of on the same sort of topic of this, in terms of I'm trying to make it a mini festival for the kids that attend, so that they're ready to attend it when they're actual teenagers, and balancing that and making sure that the kids work isn't just babysitting, but actually is really spiritually formative for them as well. And so I would love prayers as I plan that with some other people, of how we do best do that. How do we engage those children, especially the ones who are at the older end? Like, how do we engage them and keep them and make sure that week is a really fun week for them, but also is a week of spiritual transformation as well? It'd be great.
Amazing. What are you, Chris?
Yeah, I think one quite key thing which I didn't touch on earlier was just the dynamic that we have young leaders. So these are either young people from our own church, or they are former Year 6 students who have just kept coming back year on year and supporting the project and the next cohort of Year 6s. So I think my prayer point would be for them, just that they'll have a good kind of platform to share their experiences, and just that they'll feel equipped and supported, and actually feel like it's helpful for them as well as they continue to journey through secondary school. Some are only in Year 7, some are sort of in Year 10. But yeah, to pray for them. And I think just the team dynamic, slightly stretched. So we're trying to invite 2 schools to come to one after school session this year for the first time. So prayers for logistics of that would be really good.
Perfect. Well, I'll just finish to pray. And I've seen some prayers in the chat, so I'll go through that. So, Father God, we just thank you for this time this evening, just to focus on your work, Lord, as you use us to impact Year 6s. I pray, Lord, firstly for Charles, as he prepares for Satellites, that there will be this mini kids festival for the age group, and that they feel that they have something that they are part of when they were there. And thank you for all he is doing, Lord, for Youthscape, and as he's planning that, Lord, and just be with him in the preparations. I pray, Lord, for Chris, just as they focus on their young leaders and just how their team stretch, that there'll just be new opportunities for their team to grow, and that, Lord, you will just use them in everything they are doing, Lord, with their schools work. And I just pray, Lord, for anyone here this evening who's starting any new youth groups with this age group, especially coming up this Sunday. It's really exciting. And we just pray, Lord, that those go well, and that, Lord, you will just speak through us, Lord, as we do this work. And I just pray, Lord, for everyone else as we continue on with our weeks and our focus on our young people, that you will do your work, Lord, in everything, and that these year sixes will have a great transition as they move on to secondary school. Just be with us, Lord, for the rest of this evening. Amen.